Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica and our continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project. And I got a fun and unexpected video for you guys this Tuesday because over the weekend, Anton Gale released the Taito SJ core, and we're going to be talking about it today, what games are available on the system and what games will be coming shortly. But the system is an absolute banger, and that is because it's where elevator action gets its start, and that is an iconic arcade game for sure. Before you get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. Just take the elevator to get to that link. All jokes and puns aside, I absolutely love elevator action. It's one of the most iconic Taito arcade games of all time, and I think it's only bested in this genre from Taito with their own sequel, Elevator Action Returns. Now this game is old. It was released in 1983, so it's very possible Ronald Reagan was playing this in the White House on an arcade cabinet. I totally made that up, but it would be fun if that was true. And a lot of times I don't do videos on arcade boards or arcade cords this old because it's not what I grew up with and my nostalgia factor is lacking. But the System SJ has some great games, and I do play elevator action now and again, so I wanted to talk about it. But when I mean old, I mean this is still running on a Zilog Z80 processor, in this instance two of them, because the sound CPU is the same. The Zilog was a very popular sound CPU for a lot of systems after it kind of stopped being the central processing unit for the code. Now something like Jungle King here, you need to prepare yourself for what these games are if you've never played them. They are different than pretty much any other arcade game you're familiar with if you did not grow up with them, because they are punishingly difficult in spots and act in a certain way that I just kind of feel like people that grew up in the 90s aren't used to. You're going to die a lot, but you're going to have a lot of fun doing it. And this arcade hardware was quite impressive for the time. You had a little bit of pseudo parallax scrolling, you had a lot of bright colors, and you had smooth scrolling as well. Those things weren't guaranteed back in the day, but you will see here, you are going to take a lot of deaths when you play a game like this. Now, like I said, the SJ library is a mixed bag. For every elevator action, there is a water ski. Now this game is fun, but you really have to wrap your mind around how the boat moves, how that line moves, and how to keep your water skiers safe. If you bring that line over too many objects, it's going to snap. If you run into anything, you're going to die. But you will see the boat's movement versus the rope's movement does have a slight delay, so it really is going to bend your brain as to what you're expected to do to be able to succeed in a game like this. And that is pretty much predominantly the setup for System SJ games. They do play differently than what most people are used to, and I think a lot of people are actually going to like that, but give them more than 30 seconds to a minute to understand whether or not you want to play them, and try not to get eaten by a shark. And that's kind of the thing with these early 80s games. They have a different look, a different feel, and a different gameplay style than you may be used to. Now if you head over to Anton Gale's GitHub page, you're going to see all the details of the core, the games that currently work, and the games that are still work in progress. And normally I teach you guys how to do the manual installation of these, but every time I do that, like 24 hours later, all of the cores get folded into update all. So just read the directions, but you'll see what games are working and which ones aren't. And if you go into the releases folder at the top of the GitHub page, you're going to find all the files you need, the RBF being the core itself, and the MRA just kind of being like a text file to point to the core and the set of ROMs that you need to provide to play the games. But right off the top, anything that plays elevator action is a 10 out of 10 for me. This is one of my favorite Taito games of any generation. It is so incredibly simple to understand what you need to be doing, but it's almost like a puzzle action platformer, and as it gets to later stages, it becomes incredibly difficult, and making progress requires you to be very quick on the draw. You cannot go wrong with elevator action. It is not a cheap original arcade board to own, nor is it the easiest board to have wired up either. So having it in FPGA is incredible, and the sound off that Zilog is perfect. Go ahead and listen for 45 seconds. I'll come back and show you more games. I mean, the audio developers did a lot with that Zilog Z80 CPU because it is not the most powerful thing around, and they were able to make a really catchy tune, and I played a ton of elevator action both via emulation and original arcade board, and if there are any differences in the audio, I can't hear them, but leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think, and also leave me a comment and tell me if you played these games back in the day. I would be curious. Just don't get crushed by an elevator while you're doing it. But the best part about elevator action is it gave us elevator action returns. Now this is just one of my favorite games of its generation of all time, whether it's on the F3 arcade board or on the Sega Saturn. Obviously this video has nothing to do with elevator action returns, but anytime I get a chance to recommend you play that game, I'm going to, and it all started on the Taito SJ system board. Now moving over to other games, there are so many other experiences you can have on this core, and some of them are just absolutely absurd. Like BioAttack here, it is a vertical shmup that sometimes scrolls and sometimes doesn't, but you are traversing the body of a human being, fighting off what I assume are viruses in there, but they're just basically devils with pitchforks, and I'm not sure how the cellular structure of my body works with the veins, but this just looks kind of like a python skin with the intestines going through. That's what I see, but you tell me down below. But it is an interesting game mechanically, and it will change things up here. Like, I believe we're in the shoulder, I'm not sure, and it looks like there's a couple pistons there, and we either have flies or frogs inside of the body, and they all need to be shot in a particular order to freeze them up. The games were just hyper creative, and sometimes they don't make any sense whatsoever, and like I said earlier, these games can just be so incredibly hard. Trying to race here, you're just going to be scrolling the screen so fast that you're going to crash into basically everything. But how fast this game was scrolling with some of the power of the SJ board, you weren't guaranteed this fast of a scroll back in the day. Only when the NES came out, or the Famicom in Japan, did smooth scrolling become a commonplace thing. It's just one of those items where this is evolutionary in arcade history, and it is working so good on MiSTer FPGA today. And like I said, I didn't grow up with these games. I was born after most of these were released, but I am curious whether or not you were born when these were around. Leave me a comment down below and tell me if you were alive, because it can be hard to gauge sometimes my audience's overall age. My assumptions are going to be that most of you were not alive. Pirate Pete was alive when this game came out, or he happened to be, until he fell and shattered his spine and never walked again because he fell to that deck. All jokes aside, don't know where that one came from. That was actually Andy D falling, because he helped me out with some of the captures this week, as I've got a very busy schedule getting projects out by the end of June and my wife's birthday. But you can't say that Taito's developers didn't try really hard with these games. They put in pretty much every mechanic they possibly could. We go from swinging on ropes to stabbing fish under the water to getting eaten by a shark in just a moment. But there's so many different types of experiences on this board. We have the racing games, we've got the shmups, we've got the platformers, we've got kind of the puzzle games that I'll show you in just a bit. But it does a lot with a little. I'm just going to remind you again, though, that these games are incredibly hard. You've played a vertical shmup before, you know what's expected of you, but this one just feels a little bit different, and it's going to challenge you. But it's got a great soundtrack and a fun rendition of a classic song, so go ahead and listen. I'll come back and show you a few more games. And leave me a comment down below and tell me if you know what that song is. I would be curious who can tell. But I will say that when you're playing this core, you want to turn your volume down a little bit more. And that's not because the waveform or the decibel is any louder, but it's because of how these games sound. To my ear, they always kind of seem like they are louder than their meter shows. It's just something about that kind of beep and boop bop sound. It always kind of makes my ear think it's louder. But you will see here, going from a pseudo first-person mode to a horizontal shmup, a lot of fun games on this system, but some of the patterns that these enemies have, going back and forth and kind of moving around, can really trick you into a quick death. But these are the type of games that I think you're actually going to have a lot of fun with, because they're going to be so challenging. And if you loved the BioShock hacking game, then there's an entire game for you on the Taito SJ core, because all this is biohacking in BioShock, except you're doing it in an arcade game. It's actually a really fun game that is basically one giant puzzle that also involves some spatial awareness, but there's a ton of fun to be had here. You definitely can't deny that whatsoever, and that's the thing about this core. Most of the games are really fun, some are not great, but all of them are challenging, and I'm assuming most of you will have not ever played these before, but tell me down below if you have. I'd be curious where you encountered these games, if you have them in any of your collections, if you grew up during them. But for me, it's always going to start, middle, and end with elevator action. This is just one of the best arcade games of all time, because it's so incredibly simple, but yet so incredibly addicting at the same time. You can't go wrong with elevator action. But yeah, the Taito SJ core is here. There's still a few games that need to be made working, but it is here for you today. Go and download it and have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.